Okay, it's Sunday morning, July 3rd, and again, as usual in the morning, I wake up with some new ideas for the theory. Today's inspirations, I have to deal with the cycles, looking at complete cycles, half cycles, and how that relates to, I guess you can hear my cat in the background. Anyway, okay, so I have a cat in heat this morning, but I'm still trying to work on this unified field theory. And I'm also exhausted because I was up till 3 in the morning last night. So this may not come out too clear, but there's some thoughts I have to get down. I'm trying to describe the difference between binary states, saying something exists versus something doesn't exist, in terms of waveform. And at the same time, the ramifications of this lead to a definition of mass, energy, space, and time, as well as a definition of knowledge, thought, ability, and desire. Now, first of all, when we're looking at a binary state, essentially we're saying something exists. And when we say something exists or doesn't exist, which is the alternative, we're saying that we can measure it through a complete cycle of consideration and perceive no change in it. In other words, if we perceive no change in it through the resolution of our consideration, in other words, the maximum detail that we can see, the maximum change we can perceive, if something changes below that level, we do not perceive any change. We see it as continuing to exist in a steady state, and that becomes for us mass externally or knowledge internally. In other words, when we do not see anything eroding or building, it appears to exist. That's why slow, very long waveforms tend to look to us as if there is no change. It is the relationship or the phasing, the wavelength versus the frequency, again, that we're getting back to, that determines whether something will appear to be mass, energy, space, or time. And in fact, that's the progression when we look at things sequentially, at which things appear to be more volatile. When we look at mass, we could look at a mountain, we could look at a drawer, we could look at a car, we could look at a rock. Anything we look at, if we do not perceive change between one complete consideration of it and the next complete consideration of it, in other words, the cycle of mind, we see it as mass externally, we see it as knowledge internally. The cycle of mind, what is that? One complete cycle of consideration. Well, that means that we have looked at every point, we had looked at every point that we can see, from every point of view that we can take, in every order through which we can go through all four points to look at and all 4 points of view to look from. That creates the maximum number of perspectives. And when we hit the maximum number of perspectives, we can find no more relationships between us and the object. We can find no more meaning between the observer and that which is observed. Now, if nothing has altered within that cycle of perspectives that we flow through, then we perceive that item to be mass externally or knowledge internally. Now, this is the only one I'm sure of so far. The only one I have enough detail on is to say that that is the definition of mass. Now, that means that mass is not a single item. Mass is a waveform. Everything is a waveform, seen from the perspective of mental relativity. Remember, mental relativity is dealing with time as the essential element rather than space. So instead of looking at structure, instead of looking at matrix, we're going to be looking at waveform, and we're going to be looking ultimately at interference patterns. Now, if you have an interference pattern, the area in which you perceive something that is unchanging becomes essentially a standing wave in that interference pattern. It becomes something that does not move. So in one sense, when we look at an object that does not change, we're looking at something that we see as mass externally, or an internal object which we call knowledge because it hasn't changed in a complete cycle of consideration. When we look at something that has or has not moved, okay, then that is going to describe to us energy. Because if something has moved, it has energy. If something has not moved, it does not have energy. So one is looking at the concept of change. One is looking at the concept of motion. Now we also have the concept of speed, I guess, which would be space, and acceleration, delta acceleration. So we're looking at change in location, change in motion, change in speed, and change in acceleration. But it's all looking at change. Now, if we look at the 4 different kinds of variables that can affect, say, a trigonometric equation where you say y equals sine x or something, you look at being able to control the phase, you look at being able to control amplitude, you can control frequency, and what's the 4th one? Okay, and of course the 4th one, now that I've had a chance to think about it and go back to my trig, is the vertical position, how high or low it is without affecting amplitude. All the time they've worked with trigonometry, they have had within their grasp